Madam Chair, move approval of the February 7th meeting minutes.
Thank you. I'll second the motion to from Treasurer Reed to approve the minutes. Is there any discussion? Any objections? Motion approved. Approve those minutes. We'll move on to the action items today. We have one action item regarding the Abandoned and Derelict Vessels Program Work Group. We don't currently have any public testimony signed up for this, but Director Walker, you want to get us started here?
Good morning, Governor and members of the Land Board. Always happy to have you here. And it's currently not raining, so we can all be joyful about that. We have before you today, our agenda item 2 is whether the State Land Board should direct the Department of State Lands to convene a work group charged with proposing a comprehensive abandoned and derelict vessel program for Oregon, including funding needs and sources and recommending necessary legislative actions to implement such a program. As you know, the people of Oregon own the beds and banks of all navigable and tidally influenced waterways throughout the state. So that takes us 3 miles out to the territorial sea. Abandoned and derelict vessels seriously affect the health and safety of our public waterways by creating environmental and navigational hazards. And you have heard me speak this about this issue for a long time now, Governor. You're new to the Land Board. And you've been drinking from the fire hose on this particular issue, but it has been on my agenda since I came here 5 years ago. And I'm thrilled to see that we're finally seeing some movement. And I want to credit you for that because the 23-25 governor's recommended budget includes $18.76 million to help remove those ADVs that have accumulated in the public waterways, as detailed in our policy option package 113, Healthy and Safe Waterways. State Land Board members, every single one of you have sent me letters. Those are attached in the Appendix A, and thank you very much. All of you are asking us to take action on leading development of a program. Should the State Land Board provide that direction to do so today, the department will convene that work group charged with proposing a comprehensive statewide ADV program for Oregon. The work group will be creating a program framework that addresses the above elements and considers needs related to vessel removal, destruction, disposal, and recycling. Developing an expeditious timeline to staff a program that can receive federal funds and coordinate further implementation. And that's a good thing because some of those old vessels come from the federal government. Examining legal authorities and identifying options for addressing legal barriers, exploring a vessel insurance requirement, and assessing operational needs such as an ADV database. The department would convene the work group as soon as possible to ensure that work aligns with the development of our legislative concepts and policy option packages for the 2025 legislative session. The Land Board will be provided with regular progress updates, and the final report will be provided no later than April of 2024 at your State Land Board meeting. I want to note that there is a bill currently circulating in the legislature, and you'll hear more about that from our legislative coordinator, Chris Castelli, but that's House Bill 2914. It establishes a state ADV program within the department and an ADV fund in the state treasury. And this bill would allow the Land Board and the department to quickly act on the recommendations of the ADV work group and bring forward an Oregon ADV program for the legislature's consideration in 2025. And as I mentioned, Chris will update us about that in a few moments. The department's existing ADV removal plan, as outlined in the August 2022 Land Board memo, is attached as Appendix B, and that will be updated to reflect the work group's efforts. And Governor, you were not with us at that time. In August, we had our meeting at the South Slough Reserve and discussed this work plan. Working with our partners is going to be essential. Continued collaboration is essential. It reflects all of the work that we do. Our work group meetings will be publicly noticed and open to the public and include time for public comment. We are also in communication with tribal governments regarding ADV efforts and will immediately extend a formal invitation to ensure continued engagement with tribes through work group participation, conversations with staff, formal consultation, or other interaction as desired. Deputy Bill Ryan is here next to me and can answer any questions you have before I make a final recommendation. So let me ask if any of you have any questions before I do that.
Thank you, Director Walker. And as someone who's new to the board here, I really want to thank your team and my colleagues here for all the progress that has been made up to this point. I think it's been interesting to read the work that you discussed back in August. So thank you for that. Are there questions or comments? Treasurer Reed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Not so much a question, but definitely a comment. And I'd echo what you said. The urgency here, I think, is significant, and just want to reinforce my feeling about that. I know that we'll take some time to continue making progress on this, but I'm pleased that the bill is moving forward. I don't think we can wait. You'll probably hear me say something about this again at another point in today's meeting, but this is not something that we can just let continue without deliberate and intentional effort. And I'd underscore something else that I think is at the heart of this, which is more of a policy question that I hope comes up in the course of the work. A large part, it seems to me, of this question comes from the fact that there's not an insurance requirement around vessel ownership. So I hope that comes up as part of the discussion. And I was really struck by the fact that we could not accept federal support because we didn't have a program. So at the very least, we're rectifying that gap, and hopefully we can continue to set this as an urgency. We're all former members of the legislature, and I don't think it's okay for us to continue to let the legislature not be definitive in saying if we're going to just force the Common School Fund to pick this up. If that's a choice, the public and the legislature ought to be clear about that.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. Madam Secretary, any questions or comments?
Thank you, Governor, Madam Chair. Thank you for the flexibility allowing me to attend virtually from our nation's capital. But I actually just wanted, Governor, to echo your comments and give truly due credit to both Director Walker's team and Treasurer Reed, who really, the Treasurer has been quite a dog with a bone with that. And I know he and I are friends and he loves dogs. I know that he knows that's a compliment, but really has been very insistent about making sure that we don't just do this one-on-one and piecemeal. And I think that Treasurer, your comments were well taken about if the policy choice is going to be to continue to have Oregon school kids foot the bill for this, that's a policy choice that should be made. Obviously, we will argue against that policy choice, but if it is one that's to be made, that's obviously up to the legislature as opposed to just kind of letting it happen that way de facto. So I just wanted to give due credit to Director Walker and her team and to Treasurer Reed for really being dogged with this and insistent. And here we are with the development of a plan. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. And the only other thing I would add to this conversation is, and I confess I have not had a chance to look at all the additional program reports for the West Coast work. If there's a way to work with our governors in Washington, California here, particularly on that insurance issue, I think we've got to make progress there, I think, regionally on the West Coast. So, Director Ryan, anything that you want to add to next planning steps?
Governor Kotek, no, other than, of course, we're waiting to see what happens with the budget process and the positions that would be made available. But in the meantime, we're still doing planning work and looking at really trying to stick with the schedule that was in that August, or sorry, the schedule the plan that we presented to the land board or late last year. And so far that's pretty much on track. And so fingers crossed regarding the budget process. And then there is a House Bill 2914 that's also being proposed by Representative Gomberg that also sets up the fund so that we actually have a place to put monies when we get them, hopefully from the feds or other sources. So good things are kind of aligning nicely. So.
I would agree with that. Thank you for that. Director Walker, anything more?
All right, thank you. The recommendation today would be that the State Land Board should direct the department to convene an abandoned and derelict vessel program work group with scope of work and membership as outlined in this agenda item to propose a comprehensive program framework and recommend legislative action to address this issue long-term. The department should immediately commence this work to ensure efforts align with 2025 legislative session deadlines and provide a final report to the Land Board in April 2024 or earlier.
Thank you, Director Walker. Do I have a motion on the recommendation?
Madam Chair, I move approval of the recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. And a second?
I will second the motion, Governor.
Secretary seconds the motion. We have a recommendation before us. Any questions or comments further on this? Any objections? Hearing none, motion passes. Thank you very much for the hard work on that. Oh, that was item number 2 on our agenda. And the remaining items are informational items. And so we will move to item number 3, which is the annual report on the South Slough. Director Walker.
Thank you, Governor. I look around and my head doesn't move so good to the left and everybody's been to my left today. So what happens when you get in car accidents over time. Joining me at the table is Bree Yednock, who's our outstanding, most excellent manager of the South Slough. So she drove up last night. She actually asked, should I drive up in the morning? I said, heaven's sakes, no, it's raining. And I drove up to Salem last night and there was a lot of hydroplaning on that freeway, even going 55. So thank you, Bree, for coming up. And the department oversees the South Slough National Estuarine Research Reserve on the Southern Oregon coast, and we report annually on their management and performance of the reserve. The reserve manages nearly 7,000 acres of natural habitat, and I'm going to have Bree talk about all of that because she lives and breathes it every day. And I just have to tell you that I'm so excited that this is part of our program here. Initially, Governor, when I was hired, I was asked to look into changing the management of the South Slough. So Ms. Yednock and I spent 2 years researching that and no one seemed interested. And we came to the conclusion that there is a nexus here between the education from the South Slough and our school children across the state. And I believe that's what we found with all of the supporters of the South Slough. So I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Yednock to talk about those great education programs and all of the wonderful things they do. So there you go.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Governor Kotek, Secretary Fagan, Treasurer Reed. Great to see you again. For the record, my name is Bree Yednock, and I'm the Reserve Manager at the South Slough Reserve in Charleston, Oregon. And I am very excited to share this report with you today. So in your packets, you should all have a copy of the annual report covering the calendar year of 2022. And the report reviews our operations and management priorities. It discusses the accomplishments and impacts of all of our programs, and it provides an analysis of visitor use and revenue. So next slide, please. Oh, great. Turn this up. Oh, sorry, I did not rehearse this. Perfect. Okay, so starting with overview. The South Slough Reserve is a natural area on the Southern Oregon coast protected for long-term research, education, stewardship, and training. South Slough Reserve was designated in 1974 as the very first unit of the National Estuarine Research Reserve System, which has since grown to 30 reserves across our coasts. And it's coordinated at the national level by NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and in partnership with coastal states. So here in Oregon, our partner is the Oregon Department of State Lands. By statute, the reserve is also governed by the South Sioux Reserve Management Commission. And over the past nearly 50 years, next year is our 50th anniversary, the reserve has really become a recognized mainstay in the community for the learning opportunities and the recreation opportunities we provide for students and community members of all ages. South Sioux Reserve is located on the ancestral lands of the Millet Coos people who have managed this area for abundance since time immemorial. And we value and recognize the continued tribal connection to the lands and waters of the reserve. And we work closely daily with the Confederated Tribes of the Coos, Lower Umpqua, Siuslaw Indians, the Coquille Indian Tribe, and the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians. And we really do value that partnership and work with them to continue to steward this special place. Our mission is to improve the public understanding and scientific understanding and stewardship of Pacific Northwest estuaries and coastal watersheds. Our management policy is established in statute, and our work is guided by two core documents, the Department of State Land Strategic Plan, as well as our NOAA approved management plan, which focuses on these three priority areas: climate change, habitat protection and restoration, and invasive species. We have 18 talented and dedicated staff who collectively contribute to these priorities through their work. And it's really their fabulous work that I'm celebrating today and presenting today. They're incredibly hardworking and brilliant people who deserve all of the credit. So before I jump into our individual programs, I did want to call your attention to the results of a formal evaluation the reserve had in August of 2022. And this is as a requirement of the Coastal Zone Management Act. NOAA is required to periodically review all of the National Estuarine Research Reserves. Last year, NOAA evaluated our work since the year 2015 on climate resilience. This evaluation included surveys and meetings with our partners, our target audiences, our public constituents, and the results were overwhelmingly positive. The surveys showed a 98.6% overall satisfaction rating. And NOAA noted several accomplishments, including our coordination of effective partnerships that are advancing coastal resiliency and habitat restoration and addressing critical needs for estuary management and research. The evaluation also highlighted a very cool project, our Visitor Center Forest Enhancement Demonstration Project. And this project focuses on protecting our facilities from wildfire and educating others on the smart use of defensible space around buildings. In this project, we cleared the dense understory from the forest around our visitor center. We planted native and culturally important plant species. We created a rain garden, and we coordinated with the local tribes to donate Port Orford cedar logs to tribal members for traditional uses such as plank house repairs and canoe paddles. So jumping into our programs. The Reserve's education program connects children and adults with nature and opportunities to learn about coastal systems. Our education team was thrilled to return to near full capacity following the COVID pandemic last year. On May 3rd, we reopened our visitor center and resumed fairly normal programming, although we didn't quite see the average of 10,000 visitors per year that we had prior to COVID. The year included 5 fun weeks of summer camp, science camp, for ages 5 to 17. And during these camps, the kids join our interns and staff, as seen in this picture, to play games, explore the reserve and other natural areas nearby, conduct experiments, and work alongside our research staff to see really firsthand what it's like to be a coastal scientist. Our community education programs also resumed pre-pandemic levels, providing 124 community classes that connected over 3,200 people to the plants, animals, and habitats and the science of South Slough. Our formal education programs serve teachers and students throughout the year. In 2022, nearly 2,000 students came out to the reserve, and 46 teachers from across the state came to South SLU to participate in teacher training workshops. Our coastal training program is designed to translate the best available science and management tools for practical use by coastal decision makers and natural resource managers. In 2022, we provided training for 172 professionals from across Oregon. Training topics range from Port Orford cedar restoration, estuary mapping tools, wildfire prevention, and the use of biochar for forest management to reduce carbon emissions. This photo is from our lamprey identification workshop, in which we partnered with the Coquille Indian Tribe and the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife to provide biologists and natural resource practitioners from across the state with technical training in how to identify juvenile lamprey. And I don't know if you've seen a juvenile lamprey, but they look like little worms. They're very hard to tell apart. The species that look very similar at that stage in life. So it's a critical skill if you want to study lamprey populations. You need to identify them correctly and use that to be able to study them and their distributions. So these folks are getting that education through our training. Next, I'll focus on our research and monitoring program. So as part of the National Estuarine Research Reserve System, the reserve serves as a dedicated site for scientific investigations and long-term monitoring. And I could spend all day talking about the 35 awesome projects our team conducted last year, but I'll just do my best to highlight and summarize some of them. So in 2022, our research and monitoring team continued to collect continuous data at weather, climate, and water quality stations throughout the reserve, as well as throughout the Coos Estuary in partnership with local tribes. Our decades-long data, we go back decades, 1974 is when we started. That's an incredibly valuable wealth of data to be looking at short-term variability and long-term trends, and our data are used by researchers across the country. An important element of our monitoring program is the Sentinel Sites program, which looks at the impacts of climate change on wetlands. And this picture here is showing how we measure soil accretion to understand if marshes are gaining elevation at a fast enough rate to keep pace with sea level rise. Another highlight, reserve staff have been monitoring invasive five-spine crabs, also known as European green crabs, since 2012. Our data show that the numbers of these invasive crabs have been increasing since 2016. Excuse me, and are now at densities that can negatively impact our native shellfish populations, including commercially valuable Dungeness crabs. Other projects to note are the research projects conducted by our 2 graduate research fellows on harmful algal blooms and the potential for eelgrass, which is a critical habitat, the potential for eelgrass to persist in future climate change scenarios. Staff also assessed fish and invertebrate communities using environmental DNA and continued to collaborate on blue carbon projects to measure carbon storage and emissions in our wetlands. The Reserve Stewardship Program works with community members, partner organizations, and tribes to actively protect, restore, and manage our coastal lands and waters. Habitat restoration has long been an important part of our program and remains a main focus area. Work in 2022 focused on the Wasson Creek Ridge Top to Estuary Restoration Program. This is a strategic plan focused project, so you'll be hearing a lot more about progress as we make progress and work continues. Efforts in 2022 included completing restoration prescriptions for 45 acres in the reserve of upland forest. This involved variable density thinning to increase forest complexity and to increase the rate of tree growth and limb development. In the lowland areas of the Wasson Project area, we planted 2,700 willow stakes in partnership with the Coos Watershed Association, the Coquille Tribal Community Fund, and many volunteers, including the our local US Coast Guard AIDS to Navigation team. Our stewardship and facility staff also teamed up with volunteers in our trail stewards programs to control invasive species across 5.5 acres in the reserve and to improve our hiking trails. This picture is highlighting really the most impressive project of the year. This is 1,500 feet of boardwalk that was replaced on the Hidden Creek Trail using 14 volunteers and in partnership with the volunteer organization Trail Keepers of Oregon. Funding for our programs comes from multiple sources. The Common School Fund provides base funding for our operations, and then we use that funding to leverage and bring in additional funding through external grants. We are also fortunate and grateful to have the Friends of South Slough as partners who provide funds every year to support some of our programs, and we receive a very small amount of revenue from things like facility rentals and lodging fees. I'm happy to note that in calendar year 2022, our leveraged funds totaled nearly 1.2 million and comprised approximately 46% of our revenue. That's about a 4.66% increase over the previous year. An example of leveraged funds in 2022 are procurement, acquisition, and construction grants from NOAA. This picture is showing our restroom renovations that are undergoing right now to make our public restrooms fully accessible and gender neutral. We're also designing and updating our interpretive exhibits and continuing to make improvements throughout our trail system. So I want to end by noting that our volunteers and our interns are critical team members in the work that we do. The South Slough Reserve Management Commission recently celebrated their contributions at their last meeting. By the numbers, in 2022, our staff mentored 10 college interns and 7 high school interns. And those interns provided over 4,700 hours of service. We're also grateful for the 30 dedicated volunteers who contributed over 500 hours of their time and expertise in 2022. And this really helps to expand our accomplishments and our impact. That concludes my report. Thank you for your time and opportunity to share this information with you. And I would be happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Thank you, Ms. Shednock.
Yeah, I want to thank Ms. Yudnock. Truly, I love getting to go visit the South Slough. My father still lives there. My stepfather lives in Charleston. So it gives me a chance to see him. He's 86 or 87, I can't remember. But it's always just fabulous to go see what they're doing. And the annual report, as you just saw, truly captures how much South Slough contributes to the coastal education in the community and statewide, as well as the research and stewardship. And it occurred to me, Governor, and I'm not sure the Secretary has received that report either. We did give a report to the land board about our 2-year odyssey of finding other managers, and we gave a history on that. So we'll make sure the two of you get it. I know Treasurer Reed has been here. As Bree noted, 2024 marks the 50th anniversary of the Coastal Zone Management Act. And I did not know until recently, by reading the 2 letters that you have at your table, one of them from the National Estuarine Research Reserve System, and one from the Office for Coastal Zone Management and the Coastal States Organization. Oregon is the 2nd state in the nation that joined the CCMA. So we have a Coastal Zone Management Act, and we were 2nd in the nation, and we're 1st in the nation for our South Slough. So we blaze trails in Oregon, but you already knew that, Governor. I'm not telling you anything new. But this is our 50th anniversary coming up, and I look forward to bringing you all to the South Slough in 2024 to celebrate that 50 years of coastal zone management and what they're doing at the South Slough. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Director Walker, and thank you, Ms. Shednock. I look forward to my first visit. I've not been there. Looking forward to it. And also want to echo the thanks to the volunteers, interns, your entire team, the great work you're doing. So thank you. That was a great report. I'll go to Madam Secretary Owen because she's remote. Do you have any comments or questions, Secretary Fagan?
No, thank you. No, thank you, Madam Chair, Governor. Thank you.
You are welcome. Mr. Treasurer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm curious, I remember when we visited last fall, I think it was right around the time that the CHIPS Act had passed. And I think I understand there was some funding included for the for ocean acidification research in that. So I'm curious whether that has had any impact on your plans, and more generally, where you're thinking that the research is going to go in the future. I was glad to hear about the research that's underway, but maybe you could give us some thoughts on what's upcoming.
Sure. Chair, Governor, Treasurer Reed, thank you for the question. I am not familiar with that exact funding source that you're talking about, but what I will say is the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which is now being called the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, has a lot of funding for reserve systems. And we are, for the Wasson project, we've applied for funding to do that work. And we are also receiving capacity funds to be able to explore other funding opportunities that the federal government has made available. There's also the funding through the Infrastructure Reduction Act that we keep hearing. There's a lot of money in it for NOAA.
Inflation reduction. We don't want to reduce infrastructure.
Oh, sorry, and not, yes, Inflation Reduction Act, thank you. And so we are waiting to see what those programs look like and what they roll out with. But really, we are driven by the priorities outlined in our management plan. So work related to climate change, which includes ocean acidification, looking at blue carbon, looking at sea level rise and hazards to communities. Those are all projects that we'd be looking to find additional funding for.
Dr. Yadnock, one follow-up. Anything we should know about the who's using that research, or what sort of partnerships are resulting from that work?
Sure, Governor, Chair, Governor, and Treasurer Reed. We really don't do anything without partnerships, to be honest. We work heavily with the Partnership for Coastal Watersheds, which is comprised of tribes, local natural resource, different agency groups, the community, academic researchers. And so the projects that we do, we really leverage all of the talent and the smart people in our communities and beyond to bring them, into our work to have the greatest impact. The other benefit of that is we're working with folks to understand what their needs are. And so we're really directing our projects to target those specific information gaps or those, needs that they have to further coastal management.
Thanks, Dr. Yadnock.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. One comment and a question. As I'm listening to the teachers and the educators and all the folks who come to do educational programs there, I'm wondering if we've ever done some kind of economic analysis of folks who are coming there, because obviously they're staying, they're eating there, hotel space. So it's just something to think about for the future. I don't know if there's a simple formula for us to calculate that, but that would be an added bonus to add to the economic impact the SLU is having there and bringing people into the community who wouldn't normally be there.
Yes.
So.
Chair, Governor.
Yeah, we're excited to tell you we've done that
Oh, you have? Fantastic. Well, tell me more.
to you as well.
Okay.
Tell me more.
We have done that. Yes, we partnered with NOAA, and we were one of 3 reserves in a pilot economic contribution study that looked at visitation to the reserve and looked at sort of the average visitation, the types of visitors from where they were coming from, and used the best kind of methodology that they could to calculate our contribution. It also looked at those leveraged funds that I mentioned for projects. So when we do a construction project, we're hiring local contractors, they're supplying their goods and their materials. And so it looked at the ripple effects of the funds that we bring in. And I cannot remember the exact impact. I think it's over 6 million that we're contributing to Oregon as a whole.
Thank you. I'm glad that you have that data, because I think that's just one other piece of your success story.
It is, Governor. We were really excited about it. We were excited to be chosen because we're one of the smaller, more rural nerves in the system. But the impact, the economic impact was pretty significant for our size especially. So we'll get that report to you. I'd forgotten that we had done that. But she had a lot to read when she came on board. Now she's going to have a little more time to read these reports we send your way.
You send it, I will read it. So thank you.
I understand you do a lot of
Do
reading.
a lot of reading. But again, looking forward to visiting, but just, the joy of having educators from around the state, especially folks who have to identify, juvenile lamprey. That sounds complicated. So, on capturing carbon, the blue carbon, effort, what specific, could you go into a little bit more detail about what you're doing there?
Sure, Governor. Thank you for the question. So we've been part of the Pacific Northwest Coastal Blue Carbon Working Group since 2014, I believe. And this is a group of academic researchers throughout the Pacific Northwest. And it was really spurred by the question of how much carbon is stored in coastal environments. And so a lot of the work initially focused on calculating carbon stocks. So quantifying the amount of carbon that might be in a wetland, that could be found in an eelgrass area, that could be found in a tidal swamp, like a Sitka spruce swamp. And so that work is ongoing to be able to calculate the amount of carbon that we have stored. We also have partnered on projects to look at what happens if you restore a site from perhaps a pasture back to a functioning wetland. How much carbon is being sequestered year after year, and how long does it take to create that benefit of a full functioning tidal wetland as a carbon sink. We are currently working with researchers at the University of Oregon who have set up sites within the reserve to look at carbon climate change gas fluxes. So looking at the gas fluxing that's going on, the emissions of greenhouse gases from wetlands, and then how much is stored as well. So there's a lot of ongoing work. It is an exciting area to be exploring. I don't think we expect that wetlands are going to be storing as much carbon as like a forest would with the large trees and the massive biomass you have in those areas, but it's still a valuable amount. And it's definitely an additive benefit to look at when you're considering doing restoration in coastal wetlands.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And then on the comment about federal funds, just for everyone here, we are looking at that in my office to make sure that we provide direction out of our office, as well as considering additional capacity when it comes to the grants that are available through the Infrastructure Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, CHIPS and Science Act. I mean, across the board, we have new funding opportunities, and we want to make sure all of particularly our smaller natural resource agencies, know what's going on and how we can help them, attract those dollars here to Oregon. We want to make sure we're getting more than our fair share of some of those federal dollars here to enhance all the work we're doing. So we have opportunities there. So we'll be working on that with you. So
Great. Thank you, Governor. One thing I will just add too is that as part of the national system, we work with NOAA very regularly, and they are a big player in all that federal funding. And so they're doing a fabulous job of creating kind of inventories for us all to look at and playing kind of the matchmaker to be able to say this project would be really good for this funding, or perhaps a combined grant for these programs. So if there's any information I can provide, I would be happy to be passing that along as well.
Oh, thank you. We will definitely follow up. It's good to know that NOAA is being a good partner there, because there's just a lot going on, and I think it's being hard to track. So I'm glad you're getting that assistance. That's great to hear.
Thank you.
So good to know. Any other questions about the South Slough report? Not seeing any. Thank you, Ms. Ednock. Really appreciate it. Director Walker. Like I said, can't wait to visit. We'll have to plan something for the 50th. So next year.
Yes, that'll be. I'm trying to think, that'll be my 49th wedding anniversary.
Well, we can have a double
So
celebration.
we can have a double
There
celebration.
you go. Our next on our informational items, number 4, is our legislative update.
And that reminds me too, that's my 50th class reunion, because I graduated in 1974. So it'll be a big year next year.
Multiple celebrations in your future.
Yeah. All right. Well, I have been joined at the dais by Chris Costelli, our masterful legislative and government affairs coordinator, who stepped in when our other coordinator was captured by DAS. I won't go into that, Governor. How
We appreciate the share.
take our
Thank you.
people. But Chris has done this work before and was happy to come out of retirement with his other tasks here at the department and step in and make things happen and shake it up. So I'm going to turn it over to Chris to talk about what we've got going in the legislature, which some of it's a surprise. And take it away, Chris.
Sure. Thank you, Vicki. Good morning, Governor Kotek, Secretary Fagan, Treasurer Reed. For the record, my name is Chris Castelli, and I'm the interim legislative coordinator here at the Department of State Lands. I'm also Northern Operations Manager. So if you have any questions about what we do in Northwest Oregon with regards to proprietary or regulatory, please reach out. And I'm going to walk you through our legislative update this morning. The Department of State Lands is tracking 4 priority bills for the 2023 legislative session that support our goals in stewarding Oregon's land, waterways, and wetlands. In addition to framing up why these bills are a priority for DSL, I'll also be sharing an update on where they are in the legislative process. So let's start with the agency bill, which is House Bill 5037. I don't think I need to frame why that bill is a priority for us. It funds everything we do here. The bill had an informational hearing on March 7th and a public hearing on March 9th. We were scheduled for 2 days of presentations, but Vicki and the exec team got it done in 1 day. There was a lot of interest in the good work that we do here. In particular, there was a lot of interest in abandoned and derelict vessels associated with POP 113, and just a lot of interest in ADVs in general. I was able to actually listen in on the Marine Board's budget presentation as well. As you can imagine, they also fielded a lot of questions and had a lot of interest in that. And the Marine Board's a good partner of ours that we work with on this challenging task. The budget is currently in Joint Legislative Committee on Ways and Means Natural Resource Subcommittee, and will be there for a little while still. Next, let's move to the one agency bill, and that is House Bill 2238. Which outlines removal, fill permitting, and wetland delineation review fees and how we address personal property left on state lands. And I'm going to talk about the bill as introduced, and then we'll kind of talk about what's been happening with that bill. So the base bill authorizes the director to adopt rules establishing fees related to removal or fill permit applications and wetland delineation reports. It removes specified fees amounts from statute where they've been and allows the department to establish fees through rulemaking. And it gives the department 2 years to complete the rulemaking process. And if the department doesn't successfully complete that rulemaking, that part sunsets and it just goes back to the status quo of the fees that are set in statute. And we think it'll probably take all of 2 years to do this rulemaking. We expect to have a lot of stakeholder engagement and outreach, to have a robust rulemaking advisory committee to bring people to the table to talk about what a fee schedule should look like for this regulatory program moving forward. It all ties into our Armed Sustainable Funding Initiative. This is a very important regulatory program. It's important for protecting wetlands and waters of the state. Fees have been set in statute for decades, and those have not been adjusted, except with the exception of an inflation adjustment. And I believe the fees cover about 30% of the program costs right now, and the rest of that is covered by the Common School Fund. So that's been our approach, is to try to make that program a little more sustainable, work with stakeholders to come up with a mix that recoups more of the costs through the administrative fees as opposed to being covered by the Common School Fund. The bill also has a second part, which establishes a process for the department to address and dispose of personal property left on state lands. So we don't have that statute now. The bill language very similar to a bill that was passed for ODOT a few sessions back, that sets up a process for how we inventory, notify with regards to personal property that's left on state lands, and then sets up a 30-day holding period. And at the end of that holding period, the department may donate the property or dispose of it, depending on the nature of that personal property. Bill 2238 had a public hearing on March 23rd and a work session on March 30th. The bill had an amendment removing the removal fill and wetland delineation fee portion, but carrying forward the personal property piece. The amended bill moved out of the House Committee on Agriculture, Land Use, Natural Resources, and Water on an 8-1 vote, and has moved to the House floor with a due pass recommendation with Representative Susan McLean carrying it. And I believe it has a third reading today, but I think it's had a third reading for at least a few days so far.
So
Absolutely.
let me indicate that we're having internal conversations about where to go with the bill next, once it clears the House floor.
So the next bill relates to the Elliott State Forest. This is our third priority bill we're tracking, and that's Senate Bill 161. This bill makes a few tweaks to a law that was passed in 2022 regular session. That's House Bill 1546. The tweaks involve the operative dates for the Elliott, a few of them, and morphs one of the deliverables that is required from 1546. Changes the date by which certain tasks must be accomplished from July 1st, 2023 to November 1st, 2023. And that is primarily the delivery of a habitat conservation plan. It gives us a little more time to continue with that thoughtful process and get a good product in. It also changes the form of the deliverable a little bit, and I'll try to summarize here. The House Bill 1546 essentially had requirements, or the deliverable that was kind of focused on what National Marine Fisheries Service and the United States Fish and Wildlife Service would do, would be jointly publishing a notice of the availability of a final habitat conservation plan, HCP, for the Elliott, and a final environmental impact statement. Well, as you can tell, those are two things that require an action from those two federal agencies, and not something we have a lot of control over as part of the state. So Senate Bill 161 changes this to a requirement that the department submit a habitat conservation plan for the Elliott to the federal agencies, and that the Forest Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, sorry if I've said that a few times, initiates the preparation of a final environmental impact statement. So that is something we have more control over and have some more onus over. Senate Bill 161 also changes, it bumps out a reporting date for the land board to report to the Legislative Assembly. Since we're asking for a little bit more time for the HCP, it makes sense that the date for reporting to the Legislative Assembly would be pushed out a little bit. This bill was in the Senate Committee on Natural Resources and had a public hearing on March 20th and a work session on March 22nd, and it passed out of committee on a 5-0 vote. It has moved to the Senate floor with a due pass recommendation, and Chair Golden is carrying that bill. And that one has also been scheduled for a third reading for at least a week, I think. Lastly, the last bill we want to talk about circles back to management of waterways and the discussion you all had earlier today, and that's House Bill 2914 related to marine vessels. This was originally an abandoned and derelict vessel task force bill introduced by Representative Gomberg. Yeah, you know, as I mentioned with our budget presentation, with the work that you guys have done today, with your direction for the department, we've really seen a lot of positive momentum on the issue of abandoned derelict vessels this year in particular, kind of culminating this year, but over the past several years, including a lot of interest from the state legislature. So prior to you guys making your decision to have us convene a working group, it was an issue of interest to Representative Gomberg, who introduced his task force bill to have the state look into the issue of abandoned derelict vessels. Senator Taylor also introduced a bill on the Senate side, Senate Bill 588. Same thing, another ADV task force bill. With the steps that have gone forward here recently, I think both those legislators have recognized there's not really a need for a legislative task force right now. Land board is directing us to do it. We can start on it quickly. But, you know, Representative Gomberg was still very interested in trying to do something that he asked us basically, and asked the treasurer's office if there's something we could do to help keep the process moving. What is there something we could do with this bill to be helpful as we try to address these as a statewide? So the bill was amended with the assistance of DSL and the Treasurer's Office to establish the Abandoned and Derelict Vessel Program at the department and the Abandoned and Derelict Vessel Fund at State Treasury. So now we'd have those things in state law. That requires DSL to establish the policy framework for the ADV program in consultation with our partners at the Marine Board, Parks and Rec, DEQ, and other stakeholders, and report back to the legislature in February of 2024. And I can say, I think this is a very nice accompanying piece of legislation to all the work we've sort of built momentum on over the past several years. And I think it's great to have a program defined in state law, to have a fund. It fits in with POP 113. And then I think when it comes to building this policy framework, the working group that we're going to convene will fit right into that. So I know I'm very pleased with it, if I may say so. House Bill 2914 had a public hearing on March 28th and a work session on April 4th. The bill passed out of the House Committee on Emergency Management, General Government, and Veterans on a 7-0 vote. The bill has been referred to Ways and Means by prior reference with a due pass recommendation. And then I would just follow up by saying those are the 4 priority bills. The department is still tracking a couple hundred bills. Some have died, others have moved on out of committee or to Ways and Means. And we'll be happy to give another update at the close of the session to discuss any bills that made it through the legislative process if they have a significant implementation piece to them that affects the department. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Castelli, and thank you for stepping up to do this work during session. Any questions?
Comment, Madam Chair. First, well, 2 comments perhaps. One, I think on 2914, it's worth even being a little bit more positive about it. I don't think I agree with what you said as a nice accompanying piece, but I think it's even more than that in putting the fund and the program in statute. My understanding is that that's a requirement to have the possibility of receiving federal funds. So I'm just want to support and supplement what you said on that one. At the risk of repeating myself with respect to the fill removal fees, this is, I think, at the heart of what we were talking about before, and what I would say is a frustrating sort of sense of apathy or satisfaction on the part of the legislature and saying, well, we'll just let the Common School Fund cover it. And very disappointing to see that piece removed from the bill. So I was glad to hear Director Walker talking about making reference to what other options are available. We all remember there's another chamber that a bill has to go through. So I want to make sure that we are continuing to raise that issue in the Senate and look at ways that we can push the legislature to at least acknowledge the choice they are making by not taking action and asking students to cover that bill. I'm ready to go testify and make that case publicly when that opportunity presents itself. Because I'm not okay with that continuing. So we've had that conversation, Director Walker and I individually, but I wanted to put that on record in public as well.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer, and I agree with those comments. Appreciate your advocacy there, and agree with you. And thank you for the work on the abandoned and derelict vessel issue. Having a program fund allows us to take money if it comes our way while we're also working on other issues. So super important. Madam Secretary, any comments from you or questions? Nope. Just checking because want to make sure. Thank you. Any other comments?
Governor, I
Dr. Walker?
wanted to bring to your attention at your place is a envelope that contains 3 most beautiful magnets. This one is Estuary Research and Recreation of the South Slough. This one is Thriving Waters and Wetlands. And this one talks about healthy public waterways. These were all taken by a DSL staff member, Dan Carey. They are a collector's edition. This is the first time we've ever done something like this. And rather than leave a business card with members of the legislature, we provide these to legislative offices. They can stick them on their filing cabinet and know how to get a hold of the Department of State Lands and actually educate them about the things that we do here in protecting our waterways and doing all the other great work we do. So I just wanted you to see these, and Chris has had fun handing them out.
I love that. Thank you for mentioning that. And as a former legislator, really, I'm always like, I love the magnets that sat on my filing cabinets. So I think these are beautiful. So the photographer should be, these are just beautiful photos.
I still have some legislative magnets on my refrigerator at my apartment in Salem that is my home away from home. And I enjoy seeing them. So these will be attached there as well.
Well, we'll keep an eye on the legislature and appreciate the update on the priorities, and we'll have to keep track of things. They're halfway through. And we want to bring these things home. So appreciate the time. And with that, we'll move to the last informational item, which is number 5, which is other.
Yeah, thank you,
Dr. Walker.
Governor. We've got 4 minutes and I'm going to get you all done by 11 a.m. I just wanted to update you on our rulemaking. We are advancing our strategic plan goals through several rulemaking initiatives in the Aquatic Resource Management Program, also known as the ARM program. These 3 rule divisions address the regulation of Oregon's wetlands and other waters under Oregon's removal fill law. And then we just actually talked about removal fill. Updating these rules supports our goals to improve access to information and services, as well as to serve as good stewards of these beautiful lands that you see in your magnets. Currently, we're reviewing public comments for wetland determination and delineation rulemaking through Division 90. The public comment period closed March 31. Wetland determinations and delineations help property owners know whether a permit may be required to remove or add material in Oregon's wetlands and waters. Consultants map the exact boundaries of those wetlands or waters on a site and submit those reports to department staff. Last updated in 2013, the existing rules don't meet today's needs. The proposed changes include clarifications to the process and increased efficiencies, updates to technical requirements and standards for reports, inclusion of aquatic resources of special concern in the mapping, for example, bogs and hot springs and kelp beds and more, and new requirements for GIS data. We anticipate the final rules will be effective June 1 of this year. In the near term, we're drafting rule language for general authorizations, which are rules for pre-approved activities through Division 89. These rules outline specific removal fill activities that have minimal impacts, don't cause long-term harm, and can be reviewed in 30 days or less. Those rules were last updated in 2016. We are seeking to revise the activities and conditions to reflect current day best practices, increase efficiencies, and encourage wetland and waterway habitat improvements by removing unnecessary regulatory barriers that we often hear about. The draft rule language is being completed. We're convening a rulemaking advisory committee to begin meeting next month. Later this year, we will also convene another rulemaking advisory committee to review removal fill permit rules through Division 85. Impacts to aquatic resources may require a removal fill permit from the department. These rules outline procedures and requirements for a permit, including mitigation to eliminate or reduce the negative effects of a proposed project. New tools and procedures to inform mitigation have evolved over the last decade, in part due to state and federal coordination, which is always a good thing. Although rules for wetland mitigation were updated to improve ecological outcomes as recently as 2019, the department is pursuing an updated framework for how mitigation in streams is considered under the removal fill program. We hope to finalize these rules in 2024. And finally, we have started today over in Lakeview, our rulemaking process on the potential closures of Crump Lake. That first meeting is today, and it's a hybrid meeting in Lakeview. I have had conversations with both legislators who represent the area. And I have made a change to how we conduct those rulemaking hearings. In the past, those hearings assemble the rulemaking advisory committee. They draft a rule, and then the rule goes out to the public for comment. I didn't like that plan, particularly for rural communities. So our plan now is to allow public comment at all the rulemaking advisory committee meetings at the end of those, so that the rulemaking advisory committee hears from the public in real time as they're drafting those rules. As you can imagine, the community of Adele near Crump Lake has a very low population. Those folks are very concerned about closure of the lake, as are the Native American tribes who have been in that area since time immemorial. So I really want to give the locals an opportunity to have input from the beginning. I had an epiphany over the weekend, and I've asked my staff to take a look at, is there some way that we could engage volunteer organizations to monitor Crump Lake? We don't have enough Oregon State police officers to monitor that lake. We don't have cameras, and if we do, they get shot at. And the tribe, the Burns Paiute tribe, indicated they spend $1,000 a day out there monitoring. So they can't afford it. We can't afford it. So I've asked my staff during that rulemaking process to ask if there are volunteer organizations that we might be able to employ to do some of that work, and give them some kind of authority to make the calls to the state police. I don't know, Governor and members of the land board. I'm just trying to find a way to make sure the community has its recreation opportunities, because they told me themselves that there's not a lot to do here in Adele. And we go on the lake bed and recreate by walking our dogs and various things. But we do need to be very concerned about the cultural artifacts from our Native American tribes. So I don't know where we're going to go with that. Like I said, we opened our hearing today, and we'll be back to the land board when we're done with that process with some recommendations. So we'll keep you posted.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Walker, for the updates. Anything else from members of the board? Not seeing anything? Well, I very much appreciate all the information today. Excellent meeting. Thank you for all the preparation. And with that, I will adjourn today's State Land Board meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.